We talk so much about citing sources in our papers that sometimes we forget we also need to be citing our sources in our presentations too. Today I'm going to talk through how you can cite sources on your slideshows in presentations. We've talked about oral citations, and those are great for helping build your credibility and the credibility of your sources. However, we also need to be providing the citations on the slides themselves so the audience can visually see what information is ours versus what information is our sources. When it comes to giving credit where credit is due, if you would have cited this source in your paper, you need to also be citing it in your presentation. So if you're paraphrasing, if you're summarizing, if you're taking things word for word, we're citing it in a very similar fashion on our presentations. Similarly, we want to be consistent across each slide. So if you want to do the author's last name and the year, then we're going to do that on every slide. That would be kind of our bare minimum. You could also choose to share information about the publisher or maybe the title of the piece, but if you're going to do that for one source, we want to be consistent for the other sources too. Similarly, we want to put the sources in a similar spot on our slides so the audience isn't seeing it in the bottom left corner one time, bottom right corner one time it's black, one time it's white, and having all sorts of inconsistencies. We want to be as consistent as possible with the references on our slides. And finally, we want to provide a references list at the very end of our presentation to show the reader the full citations for each of our sources. Now, that isn't the only thing we should do. We should be referencing all of those sources in the text of our presentation as well, and or orally stating those sources. One of my biggest pet peeves with the references list at the end, though, is when students get to the end of their presentation, they've absolutely crushed it, they have their clincher or their mic drop moment, and then they say, and these are my slides. It's like, oh no! It's the ultimate downer at the end of a great presentation. You can just put the slides up there to acknowledge that they're there, and then even flip back to your ending slide. If people want to see your sources, they'll ask you about them, and then you can refer to the references slide. We just need the audience to know we have them, and if they want them, we can give them. So today I have some examples of citing sources on slides, and these slides come from the presentations that I've given on my dissertation. So the content really isn't all that important. I just want you to be looking at the citations. On this slide, you can see I have an assertion at the top of my slide, and then at the bottom I have two images. When we're citing images, we need to cite the photographer, the collection that the photo is in, and then the repository where the photo is stored. So for the photo on the left, Josh is the photographer. AFP is a shortened version of the collection name, and Getty Images is the repository. The references for our photographs just need to be simple and straightforward. Make sure that you're using photos that you're able to use, that are freely accessible, that are able to be attributed. Sometimes photographers don't want their work used in stuff, period, which makes sense. So just make sure that the images that you're using are okay to be used. Here is an example of how we could cite sources on a slide. With this slide, I've cited a bunch of different research studies, and because I couldn't just list them at the bottom of the slide, we wouldn't know which finding was from which study. Therefore, I have them in parentheses at the end of each bullet point. Oftentimes, I'll put the citation in parentheses in smaller font just to make the finding more of the focus, but the reference still acknowledged. So with academic journal articles, often we'll just cite them the same exact way we would cite them in text. So here I don't have any direct quotes, so you don't see any page or paragraph number. But if I took things word for word and was using a direct quotation, I would need to put quotation marks around it and put the page or paragraph number in the parenthetical citation like I would if it were in a paper. Here's an example of the analysis method that I used in one of the studies of my dissertation. And I created these visualizations that I talked the audience through. The analysis method is called thematic analysis, and it's by Braun and Clark. So I put Braun and Clark in parentheses and put it up in the header so that the audience would know that thematic analysis was Braun and Clark's, as is the rest of the information on the slide. Here's an example of how we could also cite information on a slide. So with this slide, these bullet points are 5 processes of resilience in the communication theory of resilience. So I have a header at the top here. All of this information comes from Buzzanell 2010 and 2019. So we can also put the parenthetical citation on the bottom here. But we would want to be consistent. So here, this is a theory by Buzzanell, and I have the title of the processes and the theory up here, but I have the citation in the bottom right corner. It's not exactly consistent. We might want to have the parenthetical citation up in the header, or move this parenthetical citation down into the bottom right hand to be consistent. I mean, it's not the end of the world because this is a shorter header than the other one, but just something to be keeping in mind as you're being consistent across your slides. Here's another example of how we could cite something on our slides. This is a slide where I talk about what contribution I was making with my dissertation on the left side of the slide. But on the right side of the slide, I wanted to draw our attention to those 5 processes of resilience and emphasize the one that I cared about most. So I made this little visualization, and then we can put the parenthetical inside the visualization or on the bottom right side of the visualization so that the audience knows what that citation is part of. And that citation is only part of the image, not of the rest of the slide, which is pretty visually clear when you're looking at the slide. So those are just some examples of how you could include your in-text citations in your PowerPoint. Then the last thing you'll include is your references list. It can be just like it looks in your paper and just paste it right in here. We don't want our font to be too small so the audience can't read it. So if you need another slide, you can put another slide of references for sure. And on the left side of the screen, we see another example of how we would cite a source when it's a photograph. All right, when you're creating your presentations, don't forget to cite your sources. If you're sending your presentations out as a PDF or as a PowerPoint file to other people, you can even make your sources clickable as hyperlinks throughout your presentation. That way, if the audience is interested in a graph or a figure that you have, they can click on it and go straight to the source. Otherwise, the references list will provide them with the URL if the citation isn't clickable. Good luck citing your sources and have a great rest of your day.